Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on energy flow through an ecosystem. Today, we'll explore fascinating concepts like food chains, food webs, and energy pyramids. Over the next few slides, we'll discover how energy moves through different living things and how they connect in the natural world. I'm excited to take you on this journey, so let's get started. Let's start with the sun, which is the ultimate source of energy for life on Earth. Photosynthesis is the process that plants, algae, and some bacteria use to convert this sunlight into chemical energy. It all begins when these organisms take in carbon dioxide from the air, which is represented as 6CO2. They also absorb water, 6H2O, from the soil. Using sunlight and chlorophyll, the green pigment in their cells, they transform these simple ingredients into a form of energy they can store. This process results in the creation of glucose, which is C6H12O6, a type of sugar that provides energy for the plant. Additionally, oxygen is produced as a byproduct, which is released back into the atmosphere, represented as 6O2. This entire process is crucial because it not only fuels the plant's growth, but also forms the foundation of the food chain for almost all life on Earth. By understanding photosynthesis, we see how energy from the sun is harnessed and transformed into forms that sustain life. It's a vital link connecting the sun's energy to the biological energy that powers ecosystems everywhere. Let's take a closer look at the process by which green plants produce their own food. This involves a chemical reaction where plants use water and carbon dioxide, which they take from the environment. They also harness energy from sunlight to drive this process. This entire process is known as photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, the energy from sunlight is captured and stored in the form of glucose, a type of sugar that serves as the plant's fuel. Think of glucose as the plant's way of storing energy for later use. But it doesn't stop there. The plant can also convert this glucose into starch, which is a more stable form of energy storage. Starch allows the plant to keep a reserve of energy that can be used when sunlight isn't available, like during the night or on cloudy days. This process is fundamental because it explains how plants produce their own food and store energy, which is essential for their growth and survival. It also ties into the bigger picture of how energy flows through ecosystems, supporting not just plants, but all living organisms. Organisms that can make glucose during photosynthesis are called producers. These are the living things that have the ability to produce their own food using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. They play a crucial role in the ecosystem because they form the base of the food chain, providing energy for other organisms. Think of plants, algae, and certain bacteria. These are all examples of producers. Without them, energy transfer in ecosystems would break down, and life as we know it wouldn't be possible. So, understanding producers helps us see how energy flows from the sun through different living organisms. Producers, whether they're plants or other organisms, actually use most of the energy they produce for themselves. This might seem a bit counterintuitive at first, because you might think they'd be sharing or using energy to grow or reproduce right away. But in reality, a large portion of the energy they generate through processes like photosynthesis is used to sustain their own vital functions. Think of it like a factory. Before any surplus energy can go toward growth or reproduction, the factory needs to keep its lights on, its machinery running, and its workers busy. This self-use of energy is essential for maintaining the organism's health and stability. Understanding this concept is key to grasping how energy flow works in ecosystems, because it shows us that producers aren't just passive energy creators. They're actively using a significant amount of that energy for their own survival. This sets the stage for how energy then moves through the food chain, from producers to consumers. All right, let's talk about autotrophs, which are also known as self-nourishing organisms. They are what we call primary producers because they form the base of most food chains. Now, photoautotrophs, a key type of autotrophs, get their energy directly from the sun. They use this energy to create their own food, storing it in complex organic compounds. Think of green plants, algae, and some bacteria. These are classic examples of photoautotrophs. The process begins with light energy being captured and used to convert simple inorganic compounds, like carbon dioxide and water, into more complex organic molecules. This is essential because it means they can produce their own food from non-living substances. This process not only sustains the autotrophs themselves, but also provides energy and organic matter for all other organisms in the ecosystem. So, in essence, photoautotrophs are vital because they transform the energy from sunlight into a form that can be used by themselves and other organisms, forming the foundation of most ecosystems. They link the energy from the sun to the complex biological systems that sustain life on Earth. Chemoautotrophs, also known as chemosynthesizers, are a fascinating group of bacteria. They have the ability to oxidize reduced inorganic substances, which is a key part of their energy production process. Typically, these substances include sulfur compounds and ammonia compounds. By doing this, they convert inorganic molecules into energy they can use. What's really interesting is that they produce complex organic compounds as a result. These organic compounds are essential because they serve as building blocks for other organisms in the ecosystem. This process highlights how some bacteria can essentially create organic matter from inorganic sources, playing a crucial role in nutrient cycling. And of course, this process often involves oxygen, which acts as the final electron acceptor in many of these reactions. Overall, chemoautotrophs are vital for supporting life in environments where sunlight doesn't reach, like deep-sea vents. This connects to the broader theme of how diverse organisms adapt to different energy sources in our planet's ecosystems. Let's talk about chemosynthesis near hydrothermal vents. These incredible ecosystems are located deep in the ocean, where sunlight doesn't reach. Instead of relying on sunlight for energy, some organisms have developed a fascinating alternative: chemosynthesis. This process allows bacteria to convert inorganic molecules, like hydrogen sulfide, into organic compounds that serve as food. It's a remarkable adaptation because it supports entire communities of creatures in an environment where traditional photosynthesis isn't possible. These bacteria form the foundation of the food chain here, supporting diverse life forms like tube worms and clams. This highlights the incredible diversity of life and the different ways organisms can thrive in extreme environments, which ties back to our overall theme of resilience and adaptation in nature. Now, let's talk about some other fascinating chemoautotrophs, specifically nitrifying bacteria found right in the soil under our feet. These tiny organisms play a crucial role in the nitrogen cycle by converting ammonia into nitrites and then into nitrates. This process is essential because it makes nitrogen available in a form that plants can absorb and use for growth. It's pretty incredible to think that such microscopic bacteria are quietly working beneath us, supporting plant life and, ultimately, the entire ecosystem. Their ability to harness energy from inorganic compounds highlights the diversity of life strategies for survival, which ties back into our broader theme of how organisms adapt to and thrive in various environments. Producers, like plants and algae, use cellular respiration to supply the energy they need to live and grow. This process is essential because it converts the energy stored in sugars into a form that can be used by the cell, mainly ATP. You can think of cellular respiration as the cell's way of harvesting energy efficiently. It's a fundamental part of how producers sustain themselves and, in turn, support all other organisms in the ecosystem. So, understanding this process helps us see how energy flows through living systems, which ties directly into the overall theme of how life sustains itself through energy transformations. Cellular respiration is the process by which our cells convert the energy stored in glucose into a usable form. It's essentially how our bodies get the energy needed to power everything we do. The chemical reaction involves oxygen and glucose reacting to produce water, carbon dioxide, and energy. Specifically, 6 molecules of oxygen react with 1 molecule of glucose, resulting in 6 molecules of water, 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, and a release of energy. This energy is then used for various cellular functions. Connecting this to the overall theme, cellular respiration is fundamental because it explains how organisms obtain and use energy from their environment to sustain life. The energy that producers generate isn't always fully used up right away. Instead, any excess energy, the part that isn't immediately needed, can be passed on to other organisms. These are often organisms that can't make their own energy, like certain consumers or decomposers. This transfer of energy is a crucial part of the food chain and energy flow within ecosystems. It highlights how energy moves from producers, like plants, to other organisms, maintaining the balance of life. Understanding this helps us see the interconnectedness of all living things and how energy sustains the entire ecosystem. Organisms that cannot make their own energy are called consumers. This means they rely on other organisms to get the energy they need to survive. Unlike plants, which can produce their own energy through photosynthesis, these organisms must consume food from their environment. They play a crucial role in the ecosystem by transferring energy from one organism to another. Understanding who these consumers are helps us see how energy flows through different levels of an ecosystem. So remember, whenever you think of an organism that depends on others for energy, think of it as a consumer. Let's take a closer look at how energy flows through an ecosystem. Simplistically, this pattern of energy transfer among different organisms is what we call the trophic structure. At the base, we have the producers. These are the plants and algae that convert sunlight into energy through photosynthesis. They form the foundation of the energy pyramid. Next, we have the consumers. These are the animals that eat the producers or other consumers. They can be herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores, depending on what they eat. Then, there are the decomposers, organisms like fungi and bacteria that break down dead organic material, recycling nutrients back into the environment. Throughout this entire process, heat is released at each step, representing energy lost as thermal energy. This entire pattern of energy flow is crucial to understanding how ecosystems sustain themselves. It highlights the interconnectedness of all organisms and the importance of each level in maintaining ecological balance. Now, let's talk about heterotrophs. The term heterotrophs, which means other nourishing, refers to organisms that cannot produce their own food directly from sunlight and inorganic compounds. Instead, they rely on energy that has already been stored in complex molecules. Essentially, they have to consume other organisms or organic material to get their energy. This process can be quite intricate, often involving several steps and different types of organisms working together. For example, one organism might break down food into simpler compounds, and another might further process those compounds to release energy. It's important to highlight that heterotrophs depend on organic compounds. These are complex molecules that contain carbon and are typically found in living organisms. Sometimes, energy transfer involves heat as well, which is a byproduct of metabolic processes. So, in the bigger picture, heterotrophs are crucial in ecosystems because they are the consumers, the ones that get their energy indirectly, supporting the flow of energy through food chains and food webs. Consumers feed on organisms or particulate organic matter, which means they rely on other living things or fragments of dead material for their energy and nutrients. This is a crucial part of the food chain, as it connects producers and decomposers. When it comes to decomposers, they play a vital role in breaking down complex compounds found in dead protoplasm, essentially recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem. The main groups of decomposers are bacteria and fungi. Bacteria are particularly important because they primarily feed on animal material, breaking down tissues and organic residues left behind in animal remains. On the other hand, fungi mainly feed on plants. They are excellent at decomposing tough plant materials like cellulose and lignin, which are difficult to break down. However, bacteria also contribute significantly to plant decomposition in some cases. Understanding these decomposers helps us see how energy flows through ecosystems and how nutrients are recycled, keeping the environment healthy and balanced. This interconnectedness highlights the importance of both bacteria and fungi in maintaining the integrity of our natural world. Now, let's talk about consumers that eat producers to get energy. These are what we call first-order or primary consumers. Essentially, they are the herbivores, meaning they eat plants. These animals are the first step in the food chain that directly depends on producers, like grass or other plants, for their energy. It's important to remember that these primary consumers play a vital role in transferring energy from plants up the food chain. So, whenever you see herbivores in an ecosystem, you're looking at the primary consumers that connect the producers to the rest of the animals that come after them. Most of the energy that the primary consumer gets from the producer doesn't just sit idle. Instead, it's used up by the consumer itself for various activities. When we think about energy transfer in an ecosystem, it's important to realize that almost all of the energy the consumer receives is actually utilized, whether for movement, growth, reproduction, or maintaining bodily functions. This means that only a small portion of that energy is left over for the next level in the food chain. This concept highlights why energy transfer is so inefficient between levels. The majority of energy is used up right here at the consumer level, which is a crucial point in understanding how ecosystems balance and sustain themselves. It ties into the overall theme of energy flow and efficiency within ecological systems, reminding us that energy is constantly being consumed and transformed as it moves through the food chain. Some of the energy from the process doesn't stay within the system. Instead, it moves into the atmosphere as heat. This transfer of energy as heat is a natural part of many physical and chemical processes. It's important to understand that when energy escapes as heat, it contributes to warming the surrounding environment. This concept connects to the broader theme of energy transfer and conservation, reminding us that not all energy remains contained. Some is inevitably lost to the surroundings. Recognizing these energy losses as heat helps us better understand natural systems and how energy flows through different processes. Some energy in the primary consumer is not lost to the atmosphere or used by the consumer itself. This is a key point because it highlights that not all energy is simply dissipated or wasted at this stage. Instead, some of this energy remains available and can be passed on to the next level in the food chain. This means that energy transfer between consumers is not just about transfer, but also about the conservation of energy that can be utilized further up the chain. Understanding this concept helps us see how energy flows through ecosystems and why energy efficiency decreases as we go higher in the food chain. It's an essential part of the overall theme of energy transfer and ecosystem dynamics, showing us that energy is a limited resource that's continuously moving and being reused. Now, let's talk about a consumer that eats another consumer for energy. This is known as a secondary or second-order consumer. These organisms are a step higher in the food chain, and they obtain energy by feeding on primary consumers. They can be either carnivores, which eat other animals, or herbivores, which might occasionally eat animals if the opportunity arises. Sometimes these secondary consumers are predators, actively hunting their prey, and other times they might be scavengers, feeding on animals that are already dead. Recognizing these different roles helps us understand how energy flows through the ecosystem and how complex food webs are interconnected. This concept ties back to the overall theme of energy transfer and the importance of each level in maintaining a balanced ecosystem. It's fascinating to see how each consumer plays a vital role in sustaining the natural order. Most of the energy that the secondary consumer receives from the primary consumer is actually used up by the secondary consumer itself. This means that when the secondary consumer eats the primary consumer, only a small portion of that energy is converted into new biomass or used for growth. The rest is lost as heat or used for the secondary consumer's daily activities. It's important to understand that energy transfer between levels isn't very efficient. This is a key reason why there are fewer secondary consumers than primary consumers, and even fewer tertiary consumers. It all ties back to the overall theme of energy flow in ecosystems, showing us how energy diminishes as it moves through the food chain. Some of the energy in a system is lost as heat, which is a common occurrence due to inefficiencies. However, not all of the energy is lost. Some of it is actually stored within the system. This stored energy can then be passed on to another consumer, continuing the flow of energy through the system. This concept is really important because it highlights how energy transfer isn't always 100% efficient, but it can still be utilized effectively. It ties back to the overall theme of energy conservation and transfer, showing us how energy moves and transforms, even with some losses along the way. Now, let's talk about what we call a consumer that eats a consumer that has already eaten another consumer. This is known as a third-order or tertiary consumer. Essentially, this means it's a creature that feeds on other consumers further up the food chain. These tertiary consumers can be either carnivores, meaning they eat meat, or herbivores, which eat plants. They might also be predators, actively hunting their prey, or scavengers, feeding on carcasses left behind by others. It's important to understand that these terms help us map out the complexity of food webs, showing how energy flows through different levels of an ecosystem. Recognizing tertiary consumers gives us a clearer picture of how interconnected and dynamic food chains truly are. Now, let's talk about consumers that eat producers and other consumers. These are called omnivores. Omnivores are unique because they have a varied diet that includes both plants and animals. Essentially, they can eat a wide range of food sources, which makes them quite adaptable in different ecosystems. This ability to consume both types of food highlights the interconnectedness of food chains, showing how energy flows through different levels. Recognizing omnivores helps us understand the diversity of feeding habits in nature and how different organisms contribute to the balance of their environments. This concept ties back to our overall theme of how energy moves through the food web, connecting producers, consumers, and decomposers. Let's talk about a fascinating aspect of animal behavior: predators. Predators are animals that hunt and kill other animals for food. This might sound harsh, but it's a natural part of many ecosystems. The animals that are hunted and killed by predators are called prey. Understanding this predator-prey relationship helps us see how animals interact and survive in the wild. It's a key part of the balance in nature, ensuring that populations stay in check and ecosystems remain healthy. So, whenever we think about animals hunting, remember that predators and prey are connected in a delicate, ongoing cycle that sustains life on Earth. So, on this slide, I want to talk about consumers that eat other consumers who have already died. These consumers are called scavengers. Essentially, scavengers play a crucial role in ecosystems by helping to break down and recycle dead organic material. This process not only cleans up the environment, but also returns nutrients back into the soil, supporting the entire food web. Recognizing the role of scavengers helps us appreciate how energy flows through an ecosystem and how different organisms contribute to maintaining balance. It ties into the overall theme of understanding how various consumers and decomposers work together to sustain life. Let's take a closer look at how energy moves through an ecosystem. This process can be visualized with a food chain. It starts with the sun providing energy, which is then transferred to producers, like plants, that use that sunlight to make their own food. From there, energy moves to primary consumers, herbivores that eat the plants. Next, secondary consumers, carnivores or omnivores that eat those herbivores. And finally, tertiary consumers, top predators that feed on secondary consumers. This sequence illustrates the flow of energy from one level to the next, and it highlights how interconnected and dependent each species is within the ecosystem. Understanding this transfer of energy helps us see the bigger picture of how ecosystems function and sustain life. Together, these groups make up a food chain. A food chain is a simple way to show how energy moves from one organism to another in an ecosystem. For example, imagine grass, a rabbit, and an eagle. The grass is the producer because it makes its own food through photosynthesis. The rabbit is a herbivore or a consumer that eats the grass. Then, the eagle is a carnivore that preys on the rabbit. It's important to understand that producers are the foundation of the food chain because they provide energy for all the other organisms. Herbivores, like the rabbit, are primary consumers that eat the producers. Carnivores, like the eagle, are secondary or tertiary consumers that eat other animals. Recognizing these groups helps us see how interconnected and dependent each organism is within an ecosystem. This concept is key to understanding ecological balance and the flow of energy in nature. Today, I want to talk about food chains. Food chains are a fundamental concept in understanding how energy flows through ecosystems. They show us how different organisms are connected through what they eat. At the base, we have producers like plants that make their own food through photosynthesis. Then, herbivores or plant eaters consume these plants. Next, we see carnivores or predators that eat herbivores, and sometimes there are even omnivores, which eat both plants and animals. It's important to realize that food chains are interconnected, forming complex food webs, which give us a more complete picture of energy transfer in nature. These chains highlight the dependency of each organism on others for survival. Understanding food chains helps us grasp the delicate balance within ecosystems and why preserving biodiversity is so crucial. When one link in the chain is affected, it can have ripple effects throughout the entire system, impacting many species, including humans. So, in essence, food chains illustrate the interconnectedness of life and remind us of our role in maintaining healthy ecosystems. Rarely are things as simple as grass, rabbit, hawk, or indeed any simple linear sequence of organisms. Instead, nature tends to be much more complex. Typically, there are multiple interactions happening at once. This means that instead of a straightforward chain, we end up with what we call a food web. A food web illustrates how various organisms are interconnected through different feeding relationships. It shows that many animals might eat several different things, and a single prey can be part of multiple food sources for different predators. This complexity is crucial because it helps us understand the stability and resilience of ecosystems. So, rather than thinking of a simple line of who eats whom, imagine a vast, intricate network where everything is interconnected. This interconnectedness is key to understanding how ecosystems function and sustain life. All right, so let's talk about some of the problems with the current models. First, many of these models are too simplistic. They don't capture the complexity of real ecosystems, which can lead to inaccurate or overly generalized results. Then, there's the issue of a lack of detritivores. These are the organisms that break down dead organic material, and without them, the models miss a crucial part of nutrient cycling and energy flow. Lastly, the chains within these models tend to be too long, making them less efficient and harder to analyze. Overall, addressing these problems is essential for creating more accurate and realistic ecological models that truly reflect how ecosystems function. Let's talk about food webs. Food webs are basically interconnected food chains. They show how different organisms in an ecosystem are linked through their feeding relationships. Instead of thinking of just one chain, a food web gives us a more realistic picture of how energy flows through the environment. It highlights how many species rely on multiple sources for food and how they are all connected in a complex network. Understanding food webs helps us see the bigger picture of ecosystem stability and how changes can impact many different organisms at once. So, in essence, food webs reveal the intricate relationships that keep ecosystems functioning smoothly. Another way of showing the transfer of energy in an ecosystem is the energy pyramid. This visual tool helps us understand how energy flows from one level to the next. At the bottom, you have the producers, like plants, which capture energy from the sun. Above them are the herbivores, or primary consumers, that eat the plants. Then come the carnivores, or secondary consumers, that eat those herbivores. And finally, at the top, we often see apex predators. The key point here is that energy decreases as it moves up the pyramid, which explains why there's usually less biomass at the top. This concept ties into the overall theme of energy flow and efficiency in ecosystems, highlighting how energy transfer shapes the structure and sustainability of these systems. Energy pyramids help us visualize how energy moves through an ecosystem. What's really interesting is that the amount of available energy decreases as you go down the food chain. So, the energy that starts with the producers, like plants, gets transferred, but a lot of it is lost at each step. That's why it takes a large number of producers, or plants, to support a relatively small number of primary consumers, like herbivores. And then, similarly, it takes many primary consumers to support even fewer secondary consumers, like predators. This pattern highlights why ecosystems have this pyramid shape, with energy being most abundant at the base and decreasing toward the top. It's a crucial concept that ties into how energy flows and sustains life at every level in an ecosystem. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. Let's take a look at ecological pyramids. These are a really useful way to visualize different aspects of an ecosystem, like the standing crop, productivity, or the number of organisms at each trophic level. Imagine each of these concepts represented as a pyramid, where the size of each section corresponds to the amount of that item in a specific level of the food chain. For example, a larger section might indicate more biomass or a greater number of organisms at that level. This visual helps us understand the overall structure of an ecosystem in a clear and straightforward way. It's important to note, though, that while pyramids give us a good overview of the trophic structure, they don't show the complex interactions that happen in a food web. Those interactions are often more intricate and dynamic. Despite that, pyramids are still very useful as conceptual tools. They help us grasp the general flow of energy and matter through an ecosystem, giving us a big-picture view that complements more detailed studies. Let's take a closer look at the pyramid of energy. This diagram illustrates how energy flows, or how productive each trophic level is within an ecosystem. As we move up the pyramid, you'll notice that the size of each level gets smaller. This isn't accidental. It's a direct result of the laws of thermodynamics. Basically, at each level, some energy is lost as heat through processes like respiration. So the higher up you go, the less energy is available to support organisms at that level. This explains why there are usually fewer predators or top consumers. They simply receive less energy from the levels below. Understanding this pyramid helps us grasp the efficiency of energy transfer in ecosystems. It also highlights why energy diminishes as it moves through the food chain. This concept ties back to the overall theme of energy flow and productivity in ecosystems, emphasizing the importance of energy conservation and loss at each step. Now, let's take a look at the pyramid of numbers. This diagram shows us the number of individuals at each trophic level in an ecosystem. It's a visual way to understand how many producers, herbivores, and carnivores are present. One important thing to keep in mind is that the size of the individuals can vary a lot, so counting individuals doesn't always give us a clear picture of how much energy is actually moving through the system. In other words, a small number of large animals can have a different energy contribution than many small ones. So, while the pyramid of numbers helps us see the structure of populations, it doesn't tell us about productivity or energy flow directly. This is a key point to remember as we consider how ecosystems are organized and function. Let's take a look at the pyramid of standing crop. This diagram shows us how much biomass is present at each trophic level at a specific point in time. It's a useful way to visualize the distribution of living material across the food chain. However, it's important to remember that, similar to pyramids of numbers, this kind of pyramid might not perfectly reflect how energy flows through the system. That's because organisms vary greatly in size and growth rates. For instance, a large, slow-growing tree might have a lot of biomass, but isn't necessarily indicative of energy transfer efficiency. In this pyramid, you'll notice three main levels: the biomass of producers, herbivores, and carnivores. Each level represents how much living material is stored in organisms at that stage, at one snapshot in time. Understanding this helps us see the structure of ecosystems and the distribution of biomass, but we should always consider that energy transfer and productivity might tell a slightly different story. It's a key concept when studying ecological dynamics and how energy and matter move through ecosystems. Let's talk about inverted pyramids. Usually, we think of a pyramid of standing crop or numbers where the base is larger than the top, right? But sometimes, this can actually be flipped upside down. That means a higher trophic level, like carnivores, can have a larger standing crop than the level below, such as herbivores or producers. This might sound counterintuitive at first, but it makes sense when you consider how fast smaller organisms turn over. For example, if the lower trophic level has a high rate of turnover of small individuals, meaning they reproduce and die quickly, then their biomass can be relatively low even if their productivity is high. So, even if the biomass of producers or herbivores seems small, the total energy flow and productivity can still be very high. This doesn't violate the first and second laws of thermodynamics, because the system is constantly producing new biomass at a rapid rate, even if the standing biomass appears low at any one point in time. To put it simply, an inverted pyramid shows us that sometimes the biomass of carnivores, herbivores, or producers can look bigger at a certain moment, due to rapid turnover rates at the lower levels. It highlights the importance of understanding productivity and turnover, not just standing biomass, when we analyze ecological systems. Let's take a closer look at the pyramid of yearly biomass production. When we consider the total biomass produced by each trophic level over a year or the appropriate cycle, it turns out that the shape of this pyramid closely resembles the pyramid of energy flow. This similarity makes sense because biomass can essentially be equated to energy. So, the amount of biomass produced at each level reflects the energy transferred through the ecosystem. This connection highlights how energy flow and biomass production are intrinsically linked, reinforcing the idea that energy transfer efficiency shapes the structure of ecological pyramids. Understanding this helps us see the bigger picture of how ecosystems sustain themselves over time. Let's take a moment to understand why certain pyramids are never inverted. Specifically, pyramids of energy and yearly biomass production can't be flipped upside down. This is because doing so would actually break the laws of thermodynamics, which govern how energy flows and transforms in all systems. On the other hand, pyramids of standing crop and numbers can be inverted. This might seem counterintuitive at first, but it makes sense when you think about what these pyramids represent. They show the number of organisms or the amount of biomass at a specific point in time, which doesn't necessarily reflect the flow of energy through the system. For example, consider the food you eat in a year. The total amount of food you consume over a year is different from what might be sitting in your pantry at any one moment. That's a perfect analogy for understanding these concepts. The standing crop or the current biomass can be quite different from the total energy or number of organisms involved over time. So, in summary, the key point is that the directionality of these pyramids depends on what they measure. Energy and biomass production are constrained by physical laws, while standing crop and number pyramids are more about snapshot counts, which can be inverted without violating any principles. This underscores how energy flow and organism numbers, while related, are distinct concepts in ecological systems. Now let's take a closer look at carnivores. Carnivores can actually be divided into different groups based on their position in the food chain. Starting from the top, we have the quaternary carnivores, which are at the very apex of the food chain. These are the animals that typically have few or no natural predators. Just below them, we find the tertiary carnivores, which prey on secondary carnivores. Moving down, the secondary carnivores hunt primary carnivores, and finally, the primary carnivores feed on herbivores or other prey. One key point to remember is that the last carnivore in a chain, the one that isn't usually preyed upon by others, is often called the top carnivore. This concept is especially important because it highlights the balance within ecosystems, where each level plays a specific role in maintaining stability. Understanding these roles helps us grasp the interconnectedness of food webs and the importance of preserving top predators for ecosystem health. Let's take a moment to look at some alternate terminology that helps us understand different roles in the food chain. When we say producers, we're talking about plants and other organisms that capture energy directly from the sun. Think of them as the foundation of the energy pyramid. Moving up, Herbivores are animals that eat plants, while carnivores are those that eat other animals. Then we have omnivores, which are pretty versatile. They eat both plants and animals. Now, within herbivores, there are some specialized groups worth noting. Granivores are seed eaters, and they focus on consuming seeds, which are packed with nutrients. Then there are frugivores, or fruit eaters, that primarily feed on fruits. Recognizing these distinctions helps us see how different animals have adapted to specific food sources, which is key to understanding energy flow and ecological relationships overall. These terms, though different, all connect back to the bigger picture of how energy moves through ecosystems. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. I truly appreciate your engagement and interest. Remember, the concepts we've discussed are aimed at helping us improve and innovate in our field. If you have any questions or want to explore these ideas further, please don't hesitate to reach out. Once again, thank you, and I look forward to working together to apply these insights in our projects.